On September 3rd, the IMF published a report about its Article 4 consultation in the Republic of Macedonia. What is the IMF? And what on earth is Article 4 consultation? The IMF is short for International Monetary Fund. It is a multilateral financial organization established after the Second World War and based in Washington, the United States. The International Monetary Fund, or the IMF, is concerned with one main issue: to prevent economic crisis. And why do they want to prevent economic crisis? So that countries remain solvent and can pay back debts, money that they owe to foreigners, to foreign banks, to foreign investors, and to foreign governments. Yes, the IMF is concerned exclusively with foreigners. It is not interested in the welfare of the local population, nor is it overly concerned with the performance of the domestic sector. Actually, if the local population suffers and is in the throes of recession, but the country continues to pay its debts regularly, the IMF is happy. If you don't believe me, look at Greece. And so this is the IMF. What about Article 4 consultation? That is a glorified name for an annual visit by representatives of the IMF. When they come to a country, they sit with representatives of the Ministry of Finance, they talk a lot, they wine, they dine, then they go back to Washington and write a very long report about their very short visit. And this is the consultation process. The first thing that the Gruevski government did in 2007 was to pay back all the money, or most of the money, that Macedonia owed to the IMF. The reason was that Gruevski wanted to exclude the IMF from economic decision-making in Macedonia. They did not want the IMF coming here every 3 months to check what are they doing with the economy, why they are taking these decisions and not these decisions, and generally to breathe down their neck. They wanted to play it all by themselves without IMF intervention. Okay, so what's the problem? Actually, there are 4 problems, and all of them are very serious. First of all, the IMF has a very bad record. It's very poor reputation when it comes to analysis, predictions, and projections. The IMF almost always gets everything completely wrong. Here's an example. In 2001, the IMF published a report about Argentina. They said that all the countries in the world should learn from Argentina how to manage the economy because Argentinians are doing it the best. A month later, yes, 1 month later, the economy of Argentina collapsed. Argentina was in ruins. It stopped paying its debts to all foreign banks and foreign investors. And in general, Argentina dragged the entire financial system into one of the worst crises ever. The IMF also did not predict any of the major economic crises of this century, including 1998 in Asia and 2008 and in the United States. So, very poor analysts they are. The second problem is the source of information. Macedonia does not have an independent think tank or independent research institute which issue their own analysis and their own statistics. In the United States, for instance, there is the National Bureau of Economic Research, and the Congress of the United States has its own Congressional Budget Office. These bodies analyze the economy and issue their own statistics, which are very often much better than the government's. But Macedonia doesn't have such bodies. So the exclusive source of data, the only source of information about Macedonia's economy is, yes, you guessed it, the government of Macedonia. The IMF, when it comes here, relies exclusively and only on information provided by the government, the Ministry of Finance, and by the heavily politicized and questionably reliable National Bank of the Republic of Macedonia. So they have no one to compare this to. They have no other data and no other information to cross-check the information that they receive from the government. So what's wrong with the information that they receive from the government? Well, we all know that this information is heavily politicized and very often manipulated. You cannot rely on the government's official statistics. You cannot even rely on the statistics issued by the National Bank of the Republic of Macedonia. That is true for all governments in the world, by the way. Statistics issued by governments are always politically influenced and heavily manipulated. Finally, there is the issue of how the information is interpreted. You see, the IMF and the government interpret the information in self-serving ways, in ways which serve their interests and their targets. They are not impartial arbiters. They are not neutral, objective analysts. They have agendas. The government has an agenda. The IMF has an agenda. Consider the IMF, for instance. The IMF wants the country to have as much foreign exchange as possible so that they will continue to pay the debts that they owe to foreigners. Remember, this is the main goal of the IMF. So the IMF is very interested in foreign direct investment, because foreign direct investors bring foreign exchange into the country, and then the country can use this foreign exchange to pay back the debts. So in every report of the IMF, foreign direct investment is hailed as the panacea, as the total solution to Macedonia's problems. The reality is not like that. The reality is that foreign investors in Macedonia generated precious few employment opportunities and jobs, and took a lot of money from the state in the form of tax alleviation, in the form of grants, in the form of other forms of support. All in all, foreign direct investors in Macedonia benefited more than they benefited the economy. And so, but the IMF will never say that. Similarly, the government is cherry-picking, selecting specific numbers, specific phrases from the IMF report, ignoring the rest conveniently. An example, the government just said, through its representatives, including the Prime Minister, that the IMF is praising its management of the external debt, that the IMF is very satisfied with the way that the government is keeping Macedonia at a low level of external debt. Actually, the IMF never said this. It never said anything remotely like this. If you bother to read the report, the IMF is warning that Macedonia's external debt may get out of control because the government has doubled it in the last decade. So here you are. Information source is the government. The information is unreliable. The interpretation is dubious. And the record of the IMF in interpreting economic conditions and projecting the future is very poor. Why should we trust these reports? And more importantly, why should we trust the IMF, not to mention the government, when they tell us anything about this report or what it means?